he has more joy than any human I think I've ever met. Like, we did not know how cool our house was until he came home. Like the ice maker, the garage door, like we would those first couple weeks, he would stand in our driveway and just push the button on the garage door for like 2 hours. The neighbors would come and watch because like, why is this kid standing in your driveway?
Hi friends, Allie and Dan from Camp Woodrich here, and welcome to Share Your Story, where you get to meet the incredible families that we get to spend time with. And today we are so lucky to get to chat with Callie and Brian Troyer, parents of the amazing Gideon. We're just so excited that you two are here with us today.
Thank you so much. We're excited to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so we've been connecting with you guys via social media. We had our Camp Woodrich online talent show where Gideon was the first participant.
Opening act.
Yeah, opening act. And yeah, it was so much fun. So yeah, if you guys don't mind just telling us a little bit about your family, where you live, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we're Brian and Callie, and our son Gideon is 5 years old, and we live in a little town called LaGrange, Kentucky. I work for the school system as a mental health consultant and have a private counseling practice outside of that. And Callie works for a vaccine management company from home. She works remotely. So we've lived here for 5 or 6 years now. We're both Kentucky natives, UK fans, and just gotten super plugged into the adoption community since we started our adoption process. It's been really neat.
That's amazing.
Yeah, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what that decision was like that inspired you to adopt, what that journey was.
Yeah, so we actually started talking about adoption on our first date, which I don't know how light of a topic that was.
Wow.
We started talking about it then. We had been really good friends up to that point. And so that was something that was really important before we decided to make the decision to date. Like, do we want the same things? And so we both had a grandparent who was adopted. And so that was always something that was just talked about openly, that was talked about very normally in our families. And so we had both been open to that. And then shortly after we got married, we ran across a picture of a little boy that was with a nonprofit in China, and his advocacy name was Gideon. So he didn't go by Gideon, but that was what they had called him on social media. And we just kind of fell in love with this little boy. And at the time we were like 8 years from being even old enough to adopt from China. So it wasn't like we had planned to adopt him. There was nothing, no reason our paths would have crossed, but we just kind of fell in love with him. And so Brian surprised me for our first anniversary with a sponsorship of him, and we just followed his story, and our families knew who he was because we were the weirdos that put the picture of our sponsored kid like on our mantle when he came in the door. And so so we followed his story, and about a year after we started sponsoring him, he passed away really suddenly. And there was something about that experience that just moved adoption from something that this is what we'll do one day to really just kind of the path of how we felt, led to start our family. And so that's actually where our Gideon's name came from, was after that little boy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so that's how we kind of got started on the journey.
Wow. I love how you got his name. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That is such a beautiful story.
So what did the process then look like for Gideon that you have now?
For your Gideon.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we started, oh goodness, I guess it's been like 4 years ago now. For a couple years after we got married, we had really researched and planned on adopting from Taiwan. That was always our plan. We had started connecting with the Taiwanese community locally. Like that was really where we thought we would adopt from. And then in kind of a crazy turn of events, we signed the paperwork, and like 2 weeks later, that program closed. So we were left kind of figuring out after 2 years, like, what does this look like? And so we called around to a bunch of different places and just really felt peace with staying with the original agency. And so they recommended South Korea. We met the requirements for their very similar program. And so that's how we got connected with South Korea. And then through the home study process, I don't know how common this knowledge is, I guess, outside of adoption. But when you go through that process, they just kind of give you this checklist that's several pages long. And it'll have things like, gender and skin color and age, and then all these medical needs that you might be open to. So, you work through this whole big list and you might mark yes, no, maybe. And I think when we first started, even though we, had kind of laid our yes on the table and really felt deeply that we wanted to be a family to a child who needed one, I don't think that there was really anything on our radar that we were going to be a family that had IEPs and therapists and specialists. Like, we're 25, we had just kind of started our careers, and just really that was not at all on our radar. And so we made it through the home study and talked with our social worker, and really thought, she was like, okay, your home study's done. Now we send it off to Korea and they'll match you with a child that meets the requirements that you had outlined on your list. She's like, but before we do that, on the day your home study was done, or the day our home study was done, she reached out and said, we have this file of this little boy who's been on the waiting list. Before we send your home study off, would you maybe want to take a look? So she sent us his picture, which we actually I pulled it off our dresser. This was the first picture that they sent us. And so of course we took one look at his face and we're like, yes. We
that smile.
Yes. And so we asked for the file and we had it evaluated by an international adoption specialist that weekend, and really spent a lot of time, talking about what was in his file, but kind of already knew, honestly, from the time we saw him, that the answer was going to be yes.
Wow.
And so he had been on the waiting list for some kind of unconnected, just minor medical stuff when he was about 6 months old. So instead of matching him, they had pulled his file and went through all this medical testing for 7 months. And everything came back either negative or inconclusive, and kind of all their concerns had resolved. And so he was just on the list because most families mark they want to be matched with a child that's 6 to 12 months old. And he was 13 months old by the time they redid his file. And so we said yes to him at 15 months. And at that point, still really kind of fully believed that he was developmentally typical, that, we talk about adoption trauma and adoption attachment and raising a child who's a different race. So we expected all of that, but, thought medically and developmentally he was typical. And then about 3 months after we said yes, we got a call out of the blue, just saying that the Korean agency had some concerns that now he was 18 months old and was still not walking or talking, and asked if we wanted to move forward. And at that point we said, yeah, we do. We still feel deep down, this is our son. We want to move forward. And then about a month after that, they called back and said, okay, well, now he's not making eye contact. He's not responding to his name. He's not really interacting spontaneously with other people. And at that point, they started throwing out some, very long acronyms that stood for very big diagnoses, all of which we had marked no to initially. And I think, like Brian said, it was just one of those moments where you just kind of looking back, I remember feeling so devastated, because now since then we've met 100 families who have chosen to pursue kids with specific disabilities or specific diagnoses. But I think at that time, because that was even 4 years ago, and things have changed a lot in 4 years, but we had not met anybody who said yes to a diagnosis, walking into it, knowing that this is what you're choosing for your life. And so on one hand, it was we could walk away and we could keep the life that we thought we wanted to begin with, or we could move forward with this little boy that we already love. And so, we prayed about it and had specialists review his file again, and still just deep down, it was no, that's our son. That's our boy. And life somehow seemed scarier without him in it now than whatever our life might look like with him and whatever those needs might be. And so a couple months after that, they ended up diagnosing him with autism in Korea, which is pretty unusual for that process to make that diagnosis before you come home. yeah, and so we kind of finished out that 6 months of waiting, not really knowing, your kid's 7,000 miles away, not really knowing how he was doing or how he was progressing. And finally got the chance to go meet him about 6 months after that. And oh goodness, just walking in that door and seeing him for the first time, like it was the most perfect day of any perfect day. Like the same joy that was just in that picture of him smiling, and it just was like that in person. Like he just was like overflowing with joy. He recognized us from the videos that we had sent, and it's just amazing. And so we got to meet him and then go, before the judge and say that we wanted to move forward, and convince the judge we knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into. And like, yes, we did not know what we were getting ourselves into.
Yeah.
Very confident in our yes. And so we got to go back about a month later and bring him home.
Wow.
Yeah. So what was that month like waiting? I mean,
Not fun.
yeah.
We literally just like, we had intentional conversations. Like we just can't think about it. Like we're just going to, invest in work, invest in our family, invest in our friends, just like kind of make it as normal life as we possibly can, because we can't rush it. And it doesn't do us any good to sit here stewing about, our son is on the other side of the world.
Yeah, it was hard. I will also say that the process itself felt so long, but that month in between was like, it went by so fast. Granted, I made Brian, like we had to redo, like I was painting baseboards at like 1:00 in the morning, like whatever you could do to like kind of nest and just do that nesting phase. And so it went by really quickly, but yeah, that like speeding up down the runway, leaving Korea was like the worst moment, knowing that we were leaving him.
Yeah.
I think it was actually helpful to have that month though, because there were so many question marks before we met him that some of those finally got answered, like whether it was developmental or, what size clothes do we buy him? And so like we were able to do some prep work during that month that we weren't able to before we traveled. So that was helpful.
That's so great. So you hear this so often with parenting, the parents grow with the kids and the kids with the parents. And so for you guys, whenever you bring them home, you have that initial diagnosis. What did you learn in the first 30 days, 3 months? How did you see that progress and change?
Yeah, so that transition, I feel like it's not talked about as much, especially on social media, because adoption often gets painted, like the big airport homecomings, which was truly one of the most beautiful moments of our life. But then we also, like our son was 2.5. And so he was old enough to understand that he was losing something, but not old enough to understand why. And so he grieved really deeply for his foster family. They had loved him really well, which, talking about like attachment on this side of things was really good for him to learn to attach to us. But I don't think I've ever felt as helpless or as just like completely overwhelmed as watching our son grieve and realizing like we couldn't fix it because we were the, funny looking, funny smelling, funny talking white people who came and like stuck him on this big thing in the sky that he'd never seen before. Like it was very traumatic for him to go through that. And so we saw some regression with his just with where he was developmentally on top of where he already was. And so I think that first month was just, our head was spinning. Brian, I don't think had changed even a diaper before we went to Korea. And so we're, your head is spinning of like, okay, we have this child that, you think, because you've seen pictures and videos, and then you meet them in person, and it's just a whole different, we're all just kind of learning each other. Like, what does that cry mean? What is that actually a delay? Is this because, he's grieving? And so, the first couple months were definitely really challenging.
It was a lot too, because this was us becoming parents. So there was no warm up. There was no build up. It was, here's a toddler. He doesn't speak your language. He's got some special needs. He won't be able to communicate with you. Figure it out. And
but also the taxi's here. So we're going to need you to pick up your suitcase and walk downstairs and get in the taxi. So
yeah, life doesn't just stop for a year so you can figure it out. Yeah.
Wow.
So I feel like a lot of the first, and even now, 2.5 years later, but especially early on, it was trying to figure out there's so many layers to Gideon and to his transition that, is this behavior because of, trauma? Is it because of a cultural difference? Is it because of his delays? Is it like there were so many variables that it was difficult to narrow down sometimes. And so a lot of it was just kind of trying to figure him out and let him figure us out.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I would say like one of the best things, and I mean, this is true even today, like, he grieved really hard for a couple weeks, but like after that, his joy, like he has more joy than any human I think I've ever met. Like we did not know how cool our house was until he came home. Like the ice maker, the garage door, like we would those first couple weeks, he would stand in our driveway and just push the button on the garage door for like 2 hours. The neighbors would come and watch because like, why is this kid standing in your driveway? Like, watch the door go up and down.
It wasn't just because he was stuck on it. It was because he was thrilled every single time it went up and down.
Like so excited. And so it was hard in those months, but it was so cool because even within the first couple weeks, like when we saw his joy and just like how excited Gideon was for life, like it just brought a whole new joy and light into our house and into our home and into our family.
So he's 5 now.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know kind of what were some milestones along the way, in his development that you guys have seen. And sometimes maybe I know that, some of the parents that we get to chat with, there's things that they thought would never happen. Mm-hmm. That has happened. What milestones have you guys experienced?
Yeah, so I think that's one of like my favorite parts about the story, because again, this was not necessarily the path that we thought, which I guess is like a lot of families who have biological kids that end up with diagnoses or with special needs that they don't expect. But, looking back, knowing that we had the option of saying, no, we want our life to look this way instead of this way. I think one of the things I love about our story is thinking back to that day that I thought was going to be one of the worst days of our life, where our agency literally set us down and they're like, if you want to move forward, we're going to need you to tell us for the record, are you okay if your child never walks and never talks? Because that's what Korea really wants to know, because he's not just, not talking at 18 months. Like they want to know if you're okay with that forever, if you say yes to this. And so I think back to that day so often because I thought it was going to be such this, like the worst day ever. And now like to be able to see him run across the yard or to start talking, like I go back to that day so often and just realize like we could have missed this. Like we could have missed celebrating all of the things that, otherwise I don't even know if we would have noticed. Like we would have missed out. Would have missed so many milestones in those first 2.5 years that we didn't because he was developmentally delayed. So we were there for the first time he ran across the yard. We were there for his first word. We were there for the first time he tasted ice cream, like whatever the milestone was. We got to celebrate that. And so I think back to that day a lot. So definitely, like I said, the time he just like took off running across our yard was like, oh, wow, we didn't know we would ever see that. Or I guess he went silent for a really long time after we went home, like completely silent. And so it was about a year home that he started grunting. And we started piecing together that he was asking us to do something specific. So he would pick up a piece of his puzzle and go, and we would look at it and we're like, oh, that's a circle. And then he would pick up another piece and he would do the same thing. We're like, oh, that's a triangle. And so we realized he was starting to make that communication. And it just was like a light bulb went off for him that he realized, oh, I do this and they're responding. And so it just was, So I think that was one of my very favorite things.
I don't know, you kind of hit at it. It was neat with the possibility that we wouldn't ever see these milestones, and especially bringing home a 2.5-year-old instead of an infant. Like we didn't have to miss out on a lot of those kind of younger baby milestones because we got to experience it with him, even though it was just a little bit further along for him. So that's been really special.
That's incredible.
That's amazing.
Well, as we kind of wrap up here, what are ways that people can connect with you guys?
Yeah, so probably the best way, we have a website. It's forgideon.com. It's FOR Gideon.com. So that's probably the best way to reach us. And then, of course, we're on Instagram. And then I do co-host a podcast called Adoption Hacks, where we talk about a lot of navigating the unexpected things, either in the process or once you're home. And so that's been really cool to connect with other families in the community that are kind of walking through the same things or considering the same things that we walked through.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear, from first date. It's not, hey, what band do you love? It's you're adopting, right? Because if you're not, but now to see, as you guys are, such a gift to this community, such a gift to families, I'm sure, with your work, Brian, into the special needs community. So thank you guys so much for doing this. And we're just so grateful for you, grateful to get more and more connected with you all. And thank you guys for taking the time to be on this show. So
anytime.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, another episode of Share Your Story. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And Dan and Allie here signing off. We'll see you next time.